So the season has begun, and it looks like we're in for a classic season of domination. But not the Mercedes dominance we've all become extremely used to. This time it's at the hands of Red Bull and Max Verstappen. It seems like we're entering yet another phase of domination with no real competition at the front. We had Mercedes dominate ever since 2014, and now it's flipped on its head. Following a very strong 2022 season from Red Bull blowing away the competition, they head into 2023 looking to continue that form. And well, following that first race in Bahrain, they certainly look very ominous. Mercedes' George Russell has even come out saying he thinks Red Bull could win every single race of the season. But is this an exaggeration, or do they genuinely have that much of an advantage over the whole grid? And does this mean we're in for yet another boring year with no championship fight? Well, it's very easy to get carried away after only one race despite it being very strong. Realistically, there are still 22 races left, we know as being so for this video, I'll break down the facts still seem to lack the necessary direction and conviction to persuade us that they could be in the title fight, or if Red Bull will simply sail off into the distance, much like they did in the Bahrain closest car to Red Bull at the moment. For those fans who have been watching the sport for quite a while, you will know Red Bull aren't new to top teams. It's hard to see them closing that gap to Red Bull. In 2010 to 2013, they won 4 titles in a row, Aston Martin is demonstrating their position as the second or third quickest team. So my quick take is the Red Bull will breeze to another world championship with Verstappen leading the way. From 2014 to 2020, they struggled to that being the case. We never know. They struggled to make the most of engine suppliers and the regulations, and to what extent and how quickly Mercedes can go. Spent serious time learning and experiencing Red Bull have done incredibly well with that car. However, comes 2022 and the new set of regulations, a strong and reliable Honda engine coupled with a very well-built car resulted in them being back in the fight. And well, after a short burst of competition with Ferrari at the start of the season, Max and Red Bull sailed away in the championship, with Max winning by 146 points and taking a record 15 wins. But this season didn't come without serious controversy. On October 28th of last year, the FIA announced that Red Bull had breached the cost cap, which was put in place for 2021 to restrict the big teams from overspending and squashing all chances of poorer teams from competing. And well, after a lengthy process of discussions between Red Bull and the FIA, they were punished as followed. They got a $7 million fine, but most importantly, a 10% reduction in wind tunnel testing time, basically where they test the aerodynamics of the car. But in reality, once you factor in the sliding scale of aero testing across teams, it's more like 12% less than Ferrari and 17% less than Mercedes. Please remember this because it is very important later on. Well, how these restrictions affected the development of the 2023 Red Bull was quite minimal. Basically, the restrictions on wind tunnel testing started in October 2022, but the general concept of the 2023 car was pretty much built by then, due to Red Bull being so far ahead in the 22 championship that they could shift focus onto next year's car very early in the season. So basically, the car for this year was pretty much developed without any aero restrictions. And so they arrived at 2023 pre-season testing certainly as the favourites, and lived up to that title. They were easily the quickest on race pace with an advantage over the second quickest team Aston Martin of reportedly 6/10, with Mercedes and Ferrari further behind. They also showed great short run pace by setting the quickest times on each day, apart from that glory run by Guan Yu Zhou on day 2 in the Alfa Romeo. So there is no doubt they came out of testing looking incredibly relaxed and comfortable with literally nothing to worry about. And so once the first race weekend of the year came around, it was the same story. They initially began the weekend actually with some balance issues for both cars and didn't look completely comfortable in the practice sessions. This then carried on to the first couple sessions of qualifying, with Red Bull seeming apparently on par with Ferrari, Mercedes and Aston Martin. However, come Q3, they dropped all sandbags off their car and blitzed to P1 and P2 ahead of both Ferraris. And well, the race was much of the same. Max took off instantly, building a huge gap out in front and increasing it by several tenths every lap. It got so dominant in the race that Max was told by his engineer to stick to 1 minute 37 second lap times, which was considerably slower simply to preserve the engine. So come race end, Max won by 12 seconds ahead of Red Bull teammate Sergio Perez, who finished 26 seconds ahead of the next non-Red Bull car, if you can call the Aston Martin non-Red Bull. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. But what could they have done to the already dominant RB18 to make it even stronger in 2023? Well, basically, the RB19 is in general a complete evolution of last year's car. not so much a revolution. This means they basically improve the car a little bit in every single area, making small changes which come together for serious performance gains. We can see this with their more aggressive undercut on the side pods than last year to maximise the airflow to the rear of the car, and they also made tweaks to the floor, front wing and diffuser, and endless gains under the covers. But as I mentioned previously, they've been able to focus heavily on this car and make these changes very early in the development time frame of last season. If you think about it, the fact they developed a strong car for 2022 while developing the 2021 car deep into a title fight showed they are extremely efficient with bringing upgrades. And so, seeing as they had no championship fight last season, they were able to focus on this year's car very early. But of course, another huge reason for their dominance is their number one driver, Max Verstappen. He is simply in a completely different league of his own out front. He's had a taste of serious success and has now developed a winning mentality that is incredibly hard to rival. Every time he gets in the car, he is up to speed straight away, as we saw in the race in Bahrain. And as we saw last year, he certainly has the ability to be consistent enough at a top level to win a championship. I'd even go as far as to say I haven't seen a driver gel with that car as much as Verstappen and Red Bull for a very long time. But he may have dominated the first race in a dominant car, but is there any hope for other teams to catch up and challenge the mighty Bulls? Well, I do feel the manner in which Verstappen won the first race of the year suggests he could go on and replicate that again and again. But when looking at it realistically, it's not so simple. Now, remember, they do have a reduction in aero testing until October 2023, which will certainly restrict the level of developments throughout the season. There is a ceiling as such on development work for them this season, so it will be interesting to see how they manage this. But we know Red Bull, and we know their ability to be efficient and bring upgrades, so we'll have to see how they cope over the course of the season. But don't forget, they will also need to put resources towards their 2024 car, which does require valuable wind tunnel time as well. Basically, it's all about the balance between developments this season versus for next year. But the level of development of other teams is also very important. But to be honest, it's not very promising. Mercedes have their own serious problems, as I explained in the previous video on this channel, so it seems their chances of challenging for the title is already gone following Toto's recent comments. But if all goes well, they could definitely challenge for podiums and maybe wins depending on development. Whereas Ferrari have a better chance as they are closer and have a more conducive design to what we know as being competitive. But they still seem to lack the necessary direction and conviction to persuade us that they could be in the title fight. And then there's Aston Martin, who funnily enough could be seen as the closest car to Red Bull at the moment. But simply due to resources, or lack of, compared to the top teams, it's hard to see them closing that gap to Red Bull. I feel instead the main aim for Aston Martin is to maintain their position as the second or third quickest team. So my quick take is that Red Bull will breeze to another world championship with Verstappen leading the way. But while all things point to that being the case, we never know how badly the aero penalty will affect them, and to what extent and how quickly Mercedes can get on top of their issues. All I know is Red Bull have done incredibly well with that car, and with Max Verstappen at the wheel in the form of his life, it does seem insurmountable.